Marwan, what I wanted to ask you was tell me a little bit about your childhood, right? How did you make that transition into knowing your life purpose? That, hey, I want to become a novelist, concentrating on fiction. And and what was it that drove you toward that dream?
Right. So some of the people who watch this video will be sick and tired of the story. I call this my Harry Potter story. So I think I started reading books at a very young age. When I was 5 or 6 years old. I think so. The first book I remember is an Enid Blyton book, right? A famous five or something six. But the front cover was torn, so I don't remember what the title was. But after that, and I have two elder sisters, so that helped a lot because they would have books. And one of the books that they were reading among themselves was Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone. And so I got hooked to it when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I was reading it. And it reached a point where the 4 books had come out, and there was a phase for about 3 years where J.K. Rowling was writing the 5th book, right? And so I was online one day, and I went on that dial-up modem internet, and I saw something, and I thought, wow, the story has leaked. The 5th book has leaked. And I read a bit, and then I found out that it's a fan fiction, right? It's someone just made it up. But then I had these ideas for what I thought the 5th book should be. And so the next day, when me and my friends, remember we were in 6th or 7th grade at this point, we went to play badminton, and on the way I said, guys, I found out the 5th book, I've read it, do you want to hear the story? And so they're like, yeah, tell us the story. And so I told a story that involved heliopaths. So for all you Harry Potter fans out there, Azkaban was ruled by Dementors, right? These ghostly beings. So I made up a story where before these Dementors, there used to be something called heliopaths, which are like fire beings. And they were outcast. And it just built from there. So I started telling the story to them, and it went on for about 2 or 3 days. And we weren't even playing badminton. We were just like roaming around the court, just listening to my story. When it finally finished, I felt really guilty because I knew it was a fake story, right? So I told my best friend at the time, Govind, I told him, hey dude, I need to tell you something. The story that I told you, that's fake. I made it up. And his reply is what made me realize I could be an author. He told me, yeah, right. As if you could be that creative. And that's when I realized, okay, that's the future here. And I was passionate. And shortly after that, I got my first story published in a regional magazine called Young Times. That's published in Dubai, and it's available in the Middle East and Pakistan. It was. It's not anymore. I mean, it's come back, but the old version is gone. So anyway, I wrote, and then I got 5 more stories published, and the rest is hopefully history someday. So, yeah.
Wow, that's such a cool story that you were influenced by Harry Potter, and even as a child, for me, I grew up reading a lot of fiction books, and I read Artemis Fowl, Deeper, this cool, interesting. I love the science behind a lot of. I was kind of a science nerd, Magic Treehouse, right. Fantasy as well, or Aragon, like the
right.
dragons and stuff.
Yeah.
Loved it, and as a child, just growing up on that diet of books was a part of my life. But when I grew up, I learned how important books are, right? And I always had this dream of maybe even writing a book and writing about my childhood and my experiences growing up with the name Osama, which is a very unique experience and a unique time after 9/11.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to read that book. I've been telling you, like, you should write that book.
So I have this dream of writing this book. But what I want to know from Marwan is, what does it take to write a book?
Right. So there is the technical details of writing a book, and then there's the psychological details of writing the book, right? So the technical details are simple. What you need to do is you need to open a Word document, and you need to write 60,000 words, because 60,000 words is what the normal adult novel is, like a thriller. Your standard books are 60,000. And if you write anything which is smaller than that, it becomes a novella and novelette and categories like that. So 60,000 is the limit. And when you start writing it, I always tell people that there's a quote by Stephen King where he says that with short stories, he knows where the entire story is going to go, because it's 3 pages, right? So he knows this happens, that happens, and then finally this happens. But with novels, he has a beginning and he lets the characters grow. Now, I don't necessarily do that. For me, I have it played out in my head like a movie. think of your favorite movie. You know the entire plot. That's what I do. Once I have the plot in my mind, I start writing it down. And what I aim to do is, because I focus on the thriller genre, I aim to break it down into chapters. So my aim is to make sure that each chapter works. It doesn't help if your first chapter is just a backstory that is very long and very emotional, but there's nothing to hook the reader. So you need a cliffhanger in the first chapter. Not necessarily, but something that makes the reader go to the next one. So when you break it down, it comes to around, let's say, 30 chapters if you're going for short chapters. So you know how to progress. You have the first, where you set up the characters, you have a cliffhanger, and then you build onto the final resolution of the novel. So if you're planning to write a novel, I wouldn't say just open a Word document and start typing, because you might have a lot of momentum today and you'll write 4,000 words, and then you'll write yourself into a corner, which is what George R.R. Martin of Game of Thrones has done, I think. But what you need to do is you need to think out the entire plot. Tell it to your friends, flesh it out. Tell them, listen, what would happen if this happened? And they're like, oh wow, that's an interesting story. And then what happens? So have it in your mind, and then you start breaking down into chapters, and then you work on it. As to how much time it takes, that's entirely dependent on you. I've finished a novel in a month before. I've written about 5 or 6 novels, like drafts. It hasn't come out. This is the first one that came out. But when you write for a month, it depends. If it's a thriller book, you can write fast. If it's a literary book, you need to take time. You need to dig deeper. And there is a famous quote or an anecdote about James Joyce, or one of these writers, where he says, I spent the whole day and I've only written, I think, 8 words. I'm paraphrasing, right? So the friend says, but that's fine. You wrote 8 words. To which James Joyce says, yes, but 7 of them were terrible. And I had to delete them. So it's because, those are like literary writers and they write longhand. So if they get 500 words, those 500 words will be read for like decades by people all over the world, right? They will be put up as quotes. Whereas a book like mine, no one's going to quote it. No one's going to underline a word or a sentence. If they do, there's something wrong with them. So that my kind of book is more plot oriented. So you can write it faster. And if you were to think of 1 month, 60,000 words, that comes up to roughly 2,000 words a day, which is...
It's a lot, man. That's like an essay.
Yes, but it depends on how good you are at writing and how trained your muscle is. And there will be periods where I've hit 6,000 words a day when I'm writing. Some days, because you have the entire chapter in front of you. You know the entire scene. There are cops coming. There's a alarm going off. These guys escape from the building. So and so. You have the whole scene ready. You can write it. So don't go for 2,000 words a day or 1,000 words a day. Just start. You will find your flow. But stick to it and try to keep a deadline.
So that's awesome. Yeah. So you gave us some really, really good pointers. And one is just get started. And that's something that I need to do. I need to open up that Word document and just start writing something, right?
Even if it's not the entire thing, like an outline. Like best thing is a synopsis. A synopsis is the best thing. Why do you want to write the book? I want to write the book because I want to say A, B, C, D, E. And then you flesh it out. So even if, God forbid, work gets you slammed for the next few weeks, you open that and it's like a checkpoint. You're not starting from scratch. You know that you had these thoughts and you can build off them.
Beautiful. And I think writing seems almost like going to the gym or like sticking to a diet, right? Definitely. Where you're creating a habit. And what I want to ask you is, just like going to the gym, the first day that you go to the gym after years, you're going to be sore. Like your feet are going to be kill. You might have trouble sleeping at night. What is it like developing a writing habit to become an author, to write a book?
Right. So it's definitely true. It is like writing. Writing is like going to the gym, except I think it's more spread out than going to the gym. You could go to the gym for 3 months, build up a really good physique and like muscle memory and things like that. You could stop for a year, and then if you had to restart, it would take you about 3 months to get back on track, right? But writing, it's all drawn out, so the timeline is extended. What I mean by that is, I used to write since I was 12, 13, and it used to be regular. I wouldn't churn out, let's say, 5 short stories a year at the least when I started out. But what I found out is there was a period in my life in my early 20s where I think for almost 3 years, I didn't write a word.
And
Right.
why?
It's because I was depressed, I had a lot of issues to deal with, and I just lost the love for writing. And that's another thing about writing. Creativity is not a fountain that bursts in your mind. It's more like a well that you need to keep clearing, and you need to ensure that the system is working. You can't just let it all go and expect it to just bring you a gem of a piece whenever you want it. You can't just draw into the well whenever you want it. What I found out later is, so about 2 years back when I was really getting back into writing, and when I was writing this first draft of this novel that I'm holding right now, I decided to read books, right? So during the time that I stopped writing for 3 years, I stopped reading. I was watching every trashy show on CW, Arrow, Supergirl, you name it. The worse the better. So what I found out is, when I kept a goal for myself, and I would recommend, I'm sure you must have mentioned this already, but Goodreads, it's a fantastic app.
Love it.
Not just for the fact that you can search for books and get recommendations, but simply that reading challenge. So I decided to put a reading challenge for 50 books, right? And then I stuck with it. It helped that I was unemployed for a while, but I stuck with it and I reached 55 books. The next year, I wanted to cross that and I reached 70 books. What I found out, and I know this sounds like a humble brag, but what I found out is 2 years later, when I was writing, it's like my muscles were extremely developed. There was a quantum leap in the way that I could write. So the things that your brain consumed 2 years ago, it shows up in your fingertips. That's the power of reading. And I've noticed this with a lot of people who like to write, who like to, write poems, essays, whatever. You ask them what is the last 5 books they read in the last 6 months, most likely they won't have any. They would have read a book a year, which is nothing. You need to be reading a book a week if you need to really excel, at the least. And that's something Stephen King says. He says you need to read voraciously. Oh, and can I tell you an anecdote about Stephen King?
Of course.
So Stephen King once mentioned that you need to read about 5 hours a day, right? Like he reads about 5 hours a day. And so the person who's writing this article, he says his friend heard this story and came away and told the journalist, that's ridiculous. No one reads for 5 hours. A few years later, this friend came back to the journalist and said, okay, I think he's right. Journalist asks why. So this friend says, I was in a theater in Maine, in US. That's where Stephen King is famously from, and his books are set there. He says, I was in the queue to buy the ticket and the popcorn. And there's a guy in another queue who was reading a book while standing in the queue. As the queue is inching forward, he's just reading. And he's like, this guy looks familiar. Then this guy collects his ticket and he goes into the theater. And while the trailers are playing and the lights are on, this guy is still reading the book. And the moment the lights go down, he closes the book and he starts watching the movie. After the movie is done, he's like, yep, that's Stephen King. And that is when it hit me. Like, you need, and even in his book, In Writing, he says, people don't it's not culturally accepted to read at the dining table. Well, excellence doesn't care about manners. You have to read at the dining table. So that's how important it is to read. And the reason I'm voicing it out loud is so that it reinforces it in my mind, right? So that I can go back and I can push myself as well. So yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. 5 hours per day.
Yeah.
Like, to be honest, I struggle with reading even 30 minutes per day.
Exactly.
Or
Mine is,
sometimes even an hour
I
per
try
day.
for 1 hour, but like WhatsApp and Instagram creeps into it. I get a notification and I'm like, so that's one thing I found out. What I do is I keep the last hour of the day for reading. So I keep my phone for charging and I shut off the Wi-Fi. And I'm like, anything that I need to know, I'll know it tomorrow morning. So the last 1 hour, and I even keep a timer on my phone so that I'm on my bed or where I'm reading it, phone is away. The moment it beeps, I can stop the book. Until then, I don't. So yeah, that's really helped me.
Wow, that's insane. I use a similar method actually. I sleep with my phone away from me.
Right.
And I use the app called Forest. It's like a timer app, Pomodoro method.
Right.
And I do the same thing, 30 minutes.
Right.
And right when the 30 minutes is done, or sometimes even longer if the book's really good. Right?
Right.
It depends on the book.
Exactly.
1 second.